He felt really, really bad. You'd go to see him in the nursing home, and how you do it, Frank, and one half of his body.
Many people have never had money, and truthfully, they don't need it. That's why we often got rejected. They just weren't interested. Frank Fritz's journey began humbly, with rust, dust, and forgotten treasures. But it ended in heartbreak, betrayal, and a mystery that would shock the nation. Frank wasn't just a collector, he was a cultural icon. A storyteller whose love for the past made him a legend on television. Yet behind that boyish grin and easy charm lay a life shaped by pain, resilience, and a dramatic ending that no one saw coming. Millions of viewers tuned into American Pickers to watch Frank sift through barns, garages, and hidden sheds across the country. But no one ever expected that one day the most astonishing discovery would come not from a dusty attic, but from Frank's own estate. What they found was unimaginable. The fallout, devastating. Frank was born on October 11, 1963, in Davenport, Iowa. Long before he could drive, his obsession with collecting had already taken root. While other kids played football in the yard, Frank chased after relics, coins, beer cans, stamps, even rusted razor blades. He didn't just gather objects, he hunted stories. Imagine a young boy wandering into an antique store, inhaling the scent of aged wood and old paper, staring at faded photographs and ticking clocks. For Frank, that wasn't just a store, it was a portal to another era. As he grew older, so did his appetite for history. He graduated from pocket-sized trinkets to motorcycles, dirt bikes, and rare memorabilia. Flea markets became his playground. To most people, it seemed like a quirky hobby. To Frank, it was a calling. But his path to fame wasn't instant. For nearly 25 years, Frank led a double life. By day, he was a fire inspector in Iowa, ensuring safety in crumbling buildings. By night, he scoured those same structures for forgotten treasures, helmets, extinguishers, antique alarms. His profession, unknowingly, fed the flames of his true passion. Eventually, Frank took a leap of faith. He left behind a steady job and opened Frank's Finds, a modest antique shop specializing in firefighter gear and obscure collectibles. It could have ended there, just another small-town dream. But fate had something more in store. Enter Mike Wolfe, an old middle school acquaintance with a camera, a vision, and a dream to turn picking into television gold. The chemistry between them was instant. In 2010, lightning struck. American Pickers premiered on the History Channel, and it wasn't just a show. It became a cultural phenomenon. Together, Frank and Mike hit the backroads of America, digging through decades of dust to unearth pieces of history. But the show was never just about objects, it was about the stories, the people, and the spirit of discovery. For Frank Fritz, it was never just about the objects, it was about the stories they told. That's where he truly shined. His warmth, humor, and innate ability to connect with people made him a fan favorite. Frank wasn't simply buying antiques, he was building relationships, weaving laughter, nostalgia, and raw sincerity into every interaction. Viewers saw more than a collector, they saw a man with heart. But while the cameras captured smiles and deals, something darker was unraveling behind the scenes. In 2020, fans began to notice Frank's sudden absence from American Pickers. There was no explanation, just silence. Then came the truth. Frank had undergone major back surgery, a grueling procedure that involved 185 stitches and 2 steel rods implanted into his spine. And that wasn't all. Off-camera, he was also wrestling with the demons of addiction, a private battle that threatened to consume him. Still, loyal fans held on to hope. They prayed he'd return, believed that he'd bounce back. But in 2021, the bombshell dropped, Frank Fritz was officially off the show. Mike Wolfe's announcement was clinical, almost indifferent. "I'll miss Frank," he said. But Frank wasn't convinced. In a raw and honest interview, he called Mike's statement BS, revealing a rift that had quietly shattered their long-standing brotherhood. The heartbreak wasn't just about a show ending, it was about a friendship dissolving in the cold shadows of fame. And then came the final blow. Frank Fritz was gone. The man who had dedicated his life to preserving forgotten history had, in the end, become part of it himself. But what truly shocked fans came after his death, when his estate was revealed. The items he had so carefully collected, each steeped in personal meaning, told a different story. Not just of a collector, but of a man searching for peace, for connection, for redemption. These weren't just antiques, they were artifacts of a complicated soul. His life had been full of rusted metal, vintage signs, and dust-covered dreams. But it had also been marked by love, loss, betrayal, and brilliance. Frank wasn't just a picker, he was a legend. And the legacy he left behind echoes louder than any deal he ever made. Frank Fritz wasn't your typical reality TV star. He was a storyteller, a man with a gift for turning forgotten memories into national fascination. His journey, from a small-town kid digging through garage sales to becoming a beloved icon on American pickers, was one of passion, persistence, and deep personal pain. Behind the offbeat humor and easygoing smile was a man grappling with broken friendships and inner battles that the cameras never showed. The news of his death stunned fans around the world. But to truly understand the weight of his loss, you have to go back to the very beginning, before the fame, before the fallout. Back to when Frank was just a curious kid in Davenport, Iowa. Born on October 11, 1963, his fascination with forgotten objects wasn't just a childhood phase, it was the beginning of a lifelong journey. While other kids were chasing balls or playing with action figures, Frank Fritz was chasing stories. He collected everything: coins, stamps, beer cans, even old razor blades. Where most people saw junk, Frank saw history. He'd wander into dusty antique shops with the wide-eyed wonder of someone who believed in magic, finding it in every forgotten corner. A faded photograph, a chipped toy, a rusted pocket watch, Frank didn't just want the item, he wanted the story behind it. Who had held it? Where had it traveled? What memories did it carry? As Frank grew older, that childhood curiosity blossomed into a full-fledged obsession. What started as a quirky hobby soon became a consuming passion. He spent every spare moment combing through flea markets, yard sales, and abandoned barns, always in search of the next hidden treasure. But rather than diving immediately into the antique world as a profession, Frank took a more conventional path. For nearly 25 years, he worked as a fire inspector in Iowa, a career that, ironically, brought him face to face with the very artifacts he loved. Old firehouses, forgotten warehouses, and aging municipal buildings became treasure troves. Frank began collecting vintage firefighting equipment, helmets, extinguishers, antique alarms. The passion that had driven him since childhood hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown more intense. Eventually, he made a life-changing decision. He walked away from the security of his job and opened Frank's Finds, a modest antique shop that specialized in fireman memorabilia and rare oddities. It wasn't just a career change, it was a leap of faith. And it was the first step on the path to national stardom. That turning point arrived in 2010, when American Pickers premiered on the History Channel. The show quickly became a sensation. Alongside his old friend and co-host Mike Wolfe, Frank hit the backroads of America in search of what they affectionately called rusty gold. The premise was simple: uncover valuable antiques, learn their stories, and negotiate purchases from collectors and hoarders around the country. But the show's real magic wasn't in the finds, it was in the chemistry. Mike was the fast-talking deal-maker. Frank was the grounded, scruff-bearded everyman with a collector's soul and a warm laugh. While Mike worked the numbers, Frank worked the room. He didn't just pick through people's possessions, he picked through their memories. Fans adored him because he was authentic. He had a unique way of turning potentially awkward negotiations into heartfelt moments of connection. Whether he was geeking out over a vintage gas pump or a 1950s toy, Frank's joy was contagious. For over a decade, Frank helped drive the success of American Pickers, alongside their office manager and friend, Danielle Colby. Together, they created more than just a show, they built a cultural phenomenon. But even as viewers tuned in week after week to watch Frank laugh, haggle, and marvel at rusty treasures, something behind the scenes had begun to unravel. In 2020, fans began to notice something troubling: Frank Fritz was missing from American Pickers. At first, there was no explanation. Just silence. Eventually, the truth surfaced. Frank had undergone major back surgery, a grueling procedure that left him with 185 stitches and 2 metal rods in his spine. But that was only part of the story. Behind the scenes, Frank was also quietly battling addiction, mental health struggles, and the crushing weight of fame. Then, in 2021, the announcement came: Frank Fritz was officially no longer part of American Pickers. But what truly shocked fans wasn't just his departure, it was how coldly it was handled. Mike Wolfe released a brief, emotionless statement wishing Frank well. That was it. No tribute, no acknowledgement of their years of partnership. And Frank wasn't buying it. In a raw and emotional interview, he revealed a painful truth: during his entire recovery, Mike never once called. Not a single text, not one visit. After decades of traveling side by side, building an empire together, one of them faced life-altering surgery, and the other turned away. Frank didn't hold back. He accused Mike of wanting him off the show for a long time and simply seizing the opportunity when it came. For fans who had believed in the duo's friendship, it was heartbreaking. The bond that once seemed so genuine turned out to be little more than television magic. The fallout left many stunned. Two men who had laughed together, crisscrossed the country together, and created something iconic, now stood worlds apart. Still, fans didn't forget Frank. If anything, they rallied behind him, hoping for a return or at least a reconciliation. But that moment never came. Because Frank wasn't just a co-host, he was the soul of the show. He made antiques feel human. He turned every dusty barn or cluttered garage into an adventure. His warmth, humor, and sincerity connected with viewers in a way that couldn't be replicated. Outside of the show, Frank continued building a quiet legacy. He expanded into online marketplaces, connecting with collectors worldwide. He leaned into digital platforms to sell rare finds and share his knowledge. His passion for motorcycles, something that dated back to his teenage years, culminated in one of his proudest achievements, his book How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles, a guide for collectors. It offered practical advice and heartfelt stories from a man who lived and breathed the subject. One of Frank's earliest prized possessions was a 1964 Harley-Davidson, a bike that ignited a lifelong obsession. His barn became a sanctuary for rare and vintage motorcycles, not just to own, but to study and share. Frank didn't hoard knowledge, he passed it on. Through interviews, events, and another book, American Picker Guide to Picking, he opened a window into his world, lifting the curtain on the craft that made him famous. For Frank, collecting was never just about money. It was about storytelling, preservation, and forging connections through forgotten things. But behind the smile and the passion, the struggles never truly faded. Frank lived with Crohn's disease, a painful and unpredictable condition that caused rapid weight loss, chronic fatigue, and emotional distress. He spoke openly about the toll it took, losing over 65 pounds, adhering to a rigid diet, and facing constant exhaustion. The disease wasn't just physical, it was mental. The fatigue, the isolation, the stress, it was a private battle few understood. Layer that with the pressures of fame, and Frank's world grew darker. He admitted to turning to medication like Xanax to cope with the anxiety. But in 2017, that coping mechanism led to a devastating mistake. He was pulled over for driving the wrong way on an Iowa interstate. Frank admitted to drinking and taking Xanax. Though it was his first offense, the incident left a permanent scar on his reputation and personal life. Then came the final, crushing blow. In July 2022, Frank suffered a massive stroke. He was rushed to the hospital, fighting for his life. Fans waited anxiously for updates, but what emerged was a tragic picture. Once the lively, lovable star of American Pickers, Frank was now silent. His condition was guarded, his future uncertain. And then came the news the world had feared: Frank Fritz had passed away. The world of antiques lost a legend. Fans lost a friend. And American Pickers lost its most authentic voice. In the end, Frank Fritz was more than a collector. He was a reminder that passion matters. That forgotten objects carry stories worth preserving. that even the most ordinary item can hold extraordinary meaning. Frank Fritz was once a familiar face on millions of television screens. A man whose love for antiques, motorcycles, and roadside treasures helped transform American Pickers into one of the most beloved reality shows of its time. But behind the laughter, behind the rusty gold and rural charm, there was a man fighting invisible battles. Battles with illness, addiction, and abandonment. Battles that shaped a legacy as raw and real as the artifacts he cherished. When Frank stepped away from the show, fans were left with questions. Where was he? Would he return? But the real heartbreak came when it was revealed that through all his suffering, through his illness, his surgery, and his recovery, Mike Wolfe, his co-star of over 2 decades, never once reached out. No phone call. No message. No visit. The man he had built a brand with was gone in every way that mattered. Frank made it clear, their friendship was never as close as it appeared on screen. Yes, they shared laughs and camaraderie in front of the cameras. But off-screen, the relationship was distant. The chemistry fans loved was real, but it had limits. And in the end, when it mattered most, those limits showed. According to Frank, things weren't what they seemed. He claimed that Mike Wolfe had wanted him off American Pickers for a long time, and when the chance finally presented itself, Mike took it. For fans, the revelation was devastating. For years, viewers had seen Mike and Frank as brothers in arms, partners on the road who shared a genuine bond while digging through America's forgotten treasures. To witness that connection fall apart so bitterly felt like a betrayal of everything the show stood for. Despite the fallout, one truth remained unshaken: Frank Fritz was a major reason American Pickers became a cultural phenomenon. He wasn't just another face on reality television, he was real. Whether lighting up over a vintage toy or pulling a dusty oil sign from an old barn, Frank brought a contagious excitement to the screen. His humor, honesty, and unfiltered enthusiasm turned what could have been mundane episodes into deeply memorable adventures. Even after his departure, many fans stayed loyal to Frank. They hoped he might return, or at the very least, that a reconciliation with Mike would occur. But that reunion never happened. Still, Frank's story didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Picking wasn't about fame for him, it was a way of life. Off-screen, he quietly became a respected figure in the antique world. His expertise wasn't for show, it was earned through decades of hands-on experience and a relentless passion for discovery. As the antique world evolved, Frank adapted. He embraced the digital shift, expanding his business into online marketplaces and reaching collectors worldwide. But if there was one passion that rivaled his love for picking, it was motorcycles. That obsession began in his teens. One of his first major purchases, a 1964 Harley-Davidson, may have raised eyebrows at home, but it marked the beginning of a lifelong relationship with vintage bikes. Over time, Frank amassed a remarkable collection of motorcycles, filling barns with two-wheeled relics. But it wasn't about status or bragging rights. Frank lived for these machines. In 2013, he published How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles, a book that wasn't just a guide, but a heartfelt tribute to the bikes that shaped his life. It offered collectors insights on everything from finding and restoring old bikes to understanding the value of vintage motorcycle toys. The book, written with clarity and authenticity, became a go-to resource for hobbyists and enthusiasts alike. Frank also gave back to the community that supported him. He co-hosted events, participated in exhibitions, and met with fans at antique fairs across the country. He even co-authored American Picker's Guide to Picking, a behind-the-scenes look at the art and passion that fueled the show. But what truly set Frank apart was his ability to breathe life into history. Every object he picked had a story, and Frank knew how to tell it with warmth, curiosity, and reverence. Yet beneath his ever-present smile was a man quietly fighting a war of his own. Over time, fans noticed Frank's fluctuating weight. While some chalked it up to age, others grew concerned. Eventually, Frank revealed the truth: he was battling Crohn's disease, a chronic and painful condition that affects the digestive tract. The illness led him to lose 65 pounds and forced him to adopt a strict diet just to manage the symptoms. But Crohn's wasn't just a physical struggle, it was emotionally draining, unpredictable, and isolating. Still, Frank pressed on. Fame brought visibility, opportunity, and financial reward, but also intense pressure. As American Pickers grew in popularity, Frank became a public figure almost overnight. He admitted in rare moments of honesty that he suffered from anxiety. To cope, he was prescribed Xanax. But in 2017, things took a troubling turn. One night, after mixing Xanax with alcohol, Frank was pulled over for driving the wrong way on an Iowa interstate. He admitted to both drinking and taking the medication. It was his first offense, but it marked the beginning of a downward spiral. That same year, Frank got engaged to Diane Bankson. He bought her a house, gave her a beautiful ring, and envisioned a shared future. But that dream quickly unraveled. Diane accused Frank of cheating after allegedly discovering him with another woman. Frank, in turn, claimed it was Diane who had been unfaithful for over 2 years. The split turned ugly. Frank even got a tattoo that read, "Once a cheater, always a cheater," a painful, permanent symbol of the betrayal he felt. The breakup became tabloid fodder, especially after Diane filed a lawsuit against Frank, accusing him of negligence.